Welcome back, listeners and watchers, to another jaw-dropping episode of Relative Perspective. As always, I'm your host, Stephen, and tonight's episode is one of those deep, dark dives that'll blur the lines between ancient prophecy, modern UFOs, and hidden government agendas. Now, a few weeks back, we explored the Nephilim, those mysterious beings from the book of Genesis. Now, like we learned in that video, they were said to be the offspring of the fallen angels and human women. Many believe that those same entities are still working their magic today. They're just wearing a different mask. Well, if that episode felt like a journey into forbidden history, tonight's episode is going to be part 2. Because tonight we're going to be talking about the Collins Elite. Now, this group is an alleged secret faction within the U.S. government that believe aliens are not extraterrestrial visitors, but they think that these things are spiritual imposters, and get this, demonic entities. Now, I know what you're thinking. I mean, the theory is as controversial as it is chilling. You have some out there that say that this is a fringe belief that's pushed by religious fanatics. And then on the flip side, there's others that say that this is the only thing that makes sense. So tonight, I'm going to lay it all out on the table. There's no fear-mongering, no preaching, just the facts as I can find them, the stories, and the questions. And I know there's a lot. And after we lay everything out, I'm going to let you decide what you think. Are aliens here to help us, or are they here to deceive? Now, before we dive too deep into these classified files, if you're into the paranormal and the downright unexplainable, I want you to make sure that you hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and go ahead and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on a weekly upload. I'm not just trying to do a podcast or a show. I want to build a community of truth seekers, and let me tell you something, your voice matters. Now, let's get back into the story and see if these things are aliens or demons. I want you guys to stick around to the end, and I want you to drop your comments or your opinions down in the comments below, because I want to hear what you think. I know I mentioned the name Collins Elite in the beginning, but have you ever heard of them? Probably not, and you're not alone. Now, most people haven't, and that's kind of the point. To be honest, I actually just heard about these guys last week on a podcast that I like to watch called Ninjas or Butterflies. If you hadn't heard of these guys, go check them out. They're freaking hilarious. Now, those guys are the ones that sparked my curiosity about this stuff, and I definitely had to go digging. The name Collins Elite, it sounds like it belongs to some covert military group. Kind of like a black budget ops team that doesn't exist on paper. But what people claim that the Collins Elite really was is something much, much stranger than any battlefield operation. According to multiple sources, including a researcher by the name of Nick Redfern, the Collins Elite, it wasn't about war or weapons. It was a small, super secret group made up of different parts of the United States government. You had some from the intelligence agencies, the U.S. military, even a few private defense contractors. And their mission? It wasn't to study UFOs as advanced alien technology, but their main goal was to investigate whether these things were spiritual in nature. Not from another planet, but from somewhere else entirely. Now, this story actually came into the public eye around 2010. When Redford, he released a book called Final Events. He claimed that over several years, he interviewed multiple insiders. Now, these were people who either worked with or that was around that group. And the whole group, they all said the same thing. Now, get this, that a secret think tank within the U.S. government actually thought that aliens were demons. Not little green men, not travelers from outer space, but deceptive entities. They thought that these things existed outside of our physical reality, and they feed on fear, confusion, and spiritual disconnection. So you have to ask, where did this all start? Now, most accounts, they trace the origins of the Collins Elite back to the years just after World War II. Now, America had just dropped 2 atomic bombs, and the world changed overnight. And in the wake of all that chaos, something strange started happening up in the skies. Now, from 1946 to 1947, people all across the United States started reporting UFOs or unidentified flying objects. They saw discs, lights, and orbs, and the military definitely noticed. That led to the launch of projects like Project Sign, Project Grudge, and eventually Project Blue Book. Now, this was official government efforts to analyze UFO reports. But here's the twist. While most of the public had heard about these projects as either science or military investigations, behind closed doors, you had some people in the intelligence community that were becoming deeply, deeply unsettled, not just by the sightings, but by what was being reported during these contact events. And that brings us to one of the most unusual connections to this whole story, a guy by the name of Jack Parsons. Now, Parsons isn't exactly a household name, but he should be. He was actually one of the founding members of Jet Propulsion Laboratories, or JPL for short. Now, this dude was so important that without him, we probably wouldn't have the American space program that we have today. This dude was a genius. He was flat out brilliant. But this guy was also into some really, really dark shit. Now, Parsons was a devoted follower to a guy by the name of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was the infamous British occultist who actually named himself Beast 666. Crowley basically started his own religion, and he called it Thelema. This religion, it actually blended ritual magic with esoteric beliefs. And that genius Parsons was actually one of his most passionate disciples. In 1946, right out in the desert past Pasadena, Parsons conducted a multi-day occult ritual known as Babylon Working. Now, I want you to let that name sink in for a second. Babylon, like the whore of Babylon in Revelation. Now, this wasn't symbolic. Parsons and his ritual partner, a guy by the name of L. Ron Hubbard, yeah, that's right, the same L. Ron Hubbard that started Scientology. These two guys actually believed that they can open a gateway to another world. Now, these guys wanted to tear a hole in between dimensions and bring through a goddess-like entity who would help initiate a new era for mankind. Now, they actually documented this stuff in detail. Parson actually claims that during the ritual that they performed, he saw lights in the sky. He believed that the gate that they were trying to open actually opened, that something or someone came through. Here's where things start to overlap in a very, very uncomfortable way. Because I want you to remember, just 1 year later in 1947, a strange object crashed just outside of Roswell, New Mexico. That was the incident that actually kicked off the entire modern UFO movement. Witnesses actually reported strange debris, then military officers got involved, and the whole story shifted from a flying disc to a weather balloon. And that's when the whole cover-up narrative began. Now, you had some folks in the intelligence community that started wondering, is there a connection to what happened with Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard to this? Did Parsons and Hubbard actually open up a door, and then whatever came through, did they decide to stick around? Now, ask yourself, was the Roswell incident just a crash, or was it a physical manifestation of something much more spiritual? Now, if you believe the claims about the Collins elite, this is actually the point where the alarm bells start going off, because suddenly it wasn't just radar blips or fast-moving lights in the sky. You had people that were reporting contact, abductions, and communication. And what really bothered some of these people in this group wasn't what these things actually looked like. It was what they were saying. A lot of the times they had a message about an upcoming one world order. Then they started talking about rejection of traditional religion and also a need for spiritual awakening. And that is exactly when the Collins elite officially came together. Now, these weren't just random fanatics. They were actually military officers, intelligence analysts, and scientists who all started to see a crazy pattern here. And what they saw, it didn't point to aliens. It pointed to something biblical. They came to believe that these so-called extraterrestrials were actually deceptive spirits, possibly fallen angels that disguise themselves with technology and light to actually confuse humankind. Now, if these guys were right, this wasn't just UFOs. This was a spiritual war playing out in secret behind the scenes of history. So let's say for a moment that you were one of those insiders. You've seen the reports, not just the sightings, but the abductions and the patterns and these strange messages that these things are passing on to people. And then you start seeing this stuff through a different lens, not as science fiction, but as something spiritual. And it definitely ain't the good kind. Now, it's said that that's exactly where the Collins elite group landed. Over time, they developed a worldview that's as wild as it is unsettling. Now, directly at the heart of this thing, they believed that we were looking at a massive deception, one that wasn't just happening up in the sky, but deep in the soul of humankind. Now, this was a deception that they believed was foretold in Scripture, and it was already playing out right in front of our eyes. Let me break down their thinking the way that these guys reportedly saw it. Now, first, alien abductions. To the elite, that wasn't extraterrestrial science. That was actually demonic oppression. Now, you had people being paralyzed in bed, unable to move or speak. They were hearing voices in their heads. They were experiencing missing time. They were even sometimes enduring strange invasive procedures. And get this, they were often of a sexual nature. The group actually pointed out that all of this mirrored ancient descriptions of encounters with demonic entities. They believed that these abductions weren't about collecting data. They were actually about spiritual possession, control, and torment. Now, these were the kind of things that you find in old religious texts. It's just with a new high-tech costume. Now, second, they started noticing a trend in what these beings were actually saying. Now, you had a lot of so-called contactees, these people who claimed to have regular conscious communications with aliens. They all began reporting similar messages, that humanity needs to move past religion, and they say that there's no God, just a universal consciousness, that we need a one-world government to stop all the wars, and they said that we have a new spiritual teacher that's coming to guide us into the next phase of evolution. Now, on the surface, that kind of sounds peaceful, right? Even hopeful. But to the Collins elite, this was straight out of the book of Revelations. They believed that all these messages were actually priming people for a one-world religion, where traditional faith, especially Christianity, would be cast aside. They didn't see that as enlightenment. They saw it as a soft launch of a global antichrist system. Now, third, they believed that alien technology, if it was real, it wasn't a gift. It was actually a trap. The thinking actually went like this. If these beings actually gave us advanced tech, like crash debris, propulsion systems, or weapons, it wasn't to help humanity. It was to corrupt us. Just like the story in the book of Genesis in chapter 6, where the Watchers, like we said in that last video, gave humanity forbidden knowledge. Things like weapons, sorcery, and seduction. To the Collins elite, this was actually history repeating itself. Only now, it had blinking lights and anti-gravity fields. And last, we got the big one. They feared something that they called the Great Deception. They believed that there would come a day when governments, maybe even the US, would go public. They'd make an announcement, something like this, like, yes, we made contact, and the aliens are real, and the world would actually celebrate this. But the Collins elite believed that that announcement would be the final spiritual bait and switch, because to them, what people would really be embracing wasn't extraterrestrial life. It was counterfeit gospel. It was something dressed up like salvation, but rooted in ancient darkness. So yeah, you could say that their beliefs were extreme, but they weren't random. They were looking at real patterns from reports, testimonies, and from religious texts, and they were drawing conclusions based on their worldview. They believed that aliens weren't just actors in some intergalactic story. They believed that these things were performers from a much, much older play, a cosmic drama that started with Lucifer's fall and was now entering the final act. And according to some sources, these beliefs didn't just stay hidden in the shadows. They may have actually influenced real decisions, shaping how certain defense officials and intelligence officers who approached the UFO phenomena, especially those with deeply held religious convictions. Now, not everyone agreed with them, not even in the government. But the Collins elite, they didn't care about winning a popularity contest. They actually believed that they were fighting something eternal. Now, I know what you might be thinking at this point. Okay, that's a pretty intense theory, but what actually made these guys believe what they believed? Because it's easy to assume this was some fringe religious reaction to science that these guys didn't understand. But according to the people who've looked into it, that's not how this started at all. This wasn't about blind faith. It was all about the patterns. Disturbing patterns that kept popping up across totally unrelated reports. Now, you had some from civilians, some from military insiders, and then you had some from deep inside intelligence community circles. The Collins elite started noticing things that, honestly, they're really hard to ignore. Let me go ahead and give you a few of the more unsettling ones. First off, there were people who claimed to have been abducted, whether that's in some traditional alien sense or through some other kind of experience. And they said that something very, very strange happened when they prayed. They said that the abduction actually stopped like immediately, sometimes even in mid-events. Now, you had one woman that reportedly cried out for the name of Jesus when she was having an experience where she was paralyzed and she saw shadow figures. And after she cried out for Jesus, just like that, everything stopped. The presence vanished, her body loosened up, and the room went still. Now, you have skeptics that chalk that up to the power of belief. But the Collins elite, they saw it differently. They believed that these entities weren't reacting to physiological resistance. They were actually reacting to spiritual authority. And there were many, many other stories like the one I just told you. People who used religious symbols, they used Bible verses, crosses, they even called out the name of Jesus. And after that, they reported seeing the beings recoil, or the encounter, it just broke off completely. Now, this didn't happen every time, but it happened enough to raise serious questions. Then there's a guy by the name of Jacques Vallée. He's one of the most respected UFO researchers in the whole world. Now, this dude, he's not a religious figure. He's a computer scientist and a physicist. He actually worked on early internet systems. This dude, he's not out there preaching sermons. He's analyzing data. But in his book, it's called Messengers of Deception, Vallée laid out a really, really strange theory. He said that alien contact, it doesn't always act like science fiction. It behaves like folklore. He compared it to ancient stories about fairies, jinn, spirits, and demons. These were entities that would change shape, tell half-truths, then they'd lure people into strange visions and deliver cryptic messages about peace, unity, and cosmic oneness, only to vanish without a trace. Now, he didn't say they were demons, but he definitely questioned whether they were from another planet. He actually leaned into the idea that these entities were interdimensional, not physical, but spiritual. Now, to the Collins elite, that was exactly the kind of outside information that they needed. It aligned perfectly with their worldview. And then there's a guy by the name of John Keel. You probably heard that name from the Mothman prophecies. That book and the sightings behind it, it's become legendary in the world of high strangeness. But Keel, he wasn't just writing spooky stories. He was out there doing field investigations. He was out in the field. He spoke with witnesses. He tracked timelines. And what he started to notice was something deeply, deeply unsettling. The phenomena actually seemed to respond to belief. It could change shape, and it could take different appearances depending on who this thing was talking to. Now, he started referring to these entities not as aliens, but as ultra-terrestrials. Now, these are beings that exist just outside of our perception, and he thinks that these things can manipulate our thoughts, our emotions, and even our reality itself. And more importantly, these things didn't seem interested in helping us. They seemed to be more interested in playing games, twisting reality, and messing with people's heads. To the Collins elite, this was the final piece to the puzzle. Because if the phenomena can change forms, if it could read minds, if it could mimic truth just enough to lead people astray, then this wasn't about technology at all. It was about souls. It wasn't science, it was spiritual warfare. And that's the lens that they viewed everything through. Not because that they wanted it to be true, but to them, it was the only thing that made sense. Now, I want to be fair because not everyone believes with the Collins elite theory. And hey, that's what makes this topic so fascinating, because it's not just black and white. There's another side to this coin. But once you start digging into these skeptics' arguments, they don't always hold up as well as you think. Let's walk through what the critics say. First, they argue that the whole aliens and demons idea is just religious bias. They claim that the Collins elite were letting their faith cloud their judgment. They said that they were interpreting unexplained phenomena through the lens of scripture instead of science. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable, but here's the thing. These guys weren't just Sunday school teachers writing blog posts. We're talking about people that were deep, deep inside military intelligence. These people had access to real data, real encounters, and real behavioral patterns that they couldn't explain. When those kinds of minds start turning to a spiritual explanation, you have to wonder, what did they see that we didn't? Now you have the second argument. You have the skeptics that often bring up the idea that alien encounters, they're not always negative. Some people report healing, enlightenment, even feelings of peace and love. And sure, there are a bunch of accounts like that. But you know what else causes euphoric reaction, even while it's destroying someone? Deception. I want you to think about how cult leaders work, and think about how toxic manipulators charm their victims. Just because something feels peaceful doesn't mean that it's safe. And when you line those positive encounters up with the broader patterns, you have the paralysis, the deception, and the spiritual messaging. It still fits the mold of a very, very old game. Make the lie look like light. Then there's the paperwork argument. Skeptics will say, well, if the Collins elite really existed, then where's the proof? They want to know where's the documentation, where's the freedom of information request that confirms it. But why don't we let's be real for a second. When has the government ever put its most sensitive operation in the open? We're talking about a group that, if it really existed, was likely buried beneath layers and layers of classification like need to know only, things like that. And if they were actually tasked with investigating spiritual warfare, do you really think that that operation is going to show up somewhere in a public archive? Now, to me, if anything, the absence of proof in the usual places is exactly what you would expect with something this deep and this dangerous. And finally, there's that catch-all explanation that people love to use when things get weird. They claim that maybe we're just not evolved enough to understand what's going on. Now, I'm sure that you've heard that one. It's kind of like that idea that, like, if the Collins elite were like cavemen seeing a smartphone and thinking it was magic, that their religious interpretations were just old world thinking, trying to make sense of a new world phenomena. But honestly, that's a convenient way to dismiss what might actually be the correct lens. Because what if they weren't misinterpreting it? What if they were the only ones seeing this clearly? Even some people who do believe in alien contact, they'll hedge their bets. They'll say things like, well, maybe there are multiple factions. Maybe there's some that are evil and there's some that are nice. And sure, maybe they're right. But here's the uncomfortable question that nobody really wants to ask. What if that is part of the deception too? What if pretending to be the good guy is how they gain trust? What if this isn't about galactic politics, but it's all about ancient spiritual manipulation? Because let's face it, if these beings have the power to control how we see them, what they say, and how we feel around them, how would we ever know what their true intentions are? So yeah, like always, the skeptics have their say. They usually point to psychology, to misidentification, to cultural bias, and then to superstition. But let's face it, the deeper you go, the more those explanations start to feel kind of thin. You can call it superstition or ancient fear. But if these encounters are all just misunderstandings, why do they all keep following the same script? So, here we are standing at the crossroads between modern disclosure and ancient prophecy. Now, on one side of the coin, you got the Collins elite. Now, these guys were a hidden circle of insiders who believed the so-called alien phenomena wasn't just about beings from another star system, but about entities, deceptive, powerful spiritual forces that have been masquerading as gods and spirits, and now they're claiming to be visitors from the stars. To them, it wasn't just a national security threat, it was biblical. And on the other side of the coin, you had the skeptics, you had the scientists, and even some of the abductees. This group said that these beings brought messages of light and peace and love. They also say that it's misunderstood, complex, and maybe even beautiful. And who knows, maybe the truth is something in between. And maybe the Nephilim never left. And maybe they learned just how to fly ships instead of swinging swords. And maybe they traded mountaintops for motherships. And maybe after the Watchers fell, they evolved. From giants and fire to grays and lights. From ancient monsters to modern messiahs. Or maybe, I think this is the scariest truth of all. We're not being shown what's real. We're only being shown what we're ready to accept. What looks like science might be sorcery, and what looks like peace might be preparation. And what we call extraterrestrial contact might actually be just the oldest lie ever told. And it was rewritten in a new language of light and wonder. Because think about it like this. If the deception is strong enough, you won't run from it. You'll welcome it. You'll call it progress, and you might even call it truth. And by the time that you realize what it really is, it may be too late. Okay, guys, I want to thank you for riding along on this deep, dark dive into one of the most disturbing and mysterious theories tied to alien phenomena. You've been listening to Relative Perspective, and as always, I'm your host, Stephen. Now, if tonight's episode made you look up in the sky a little differently, or just remind you that sometimes the scariest things wear the friendliest face, go ahead and do me a favor. I want you to hit the subscribe button, pound down on that like button, And I want you to share this episode with someone who's not afraid to question what they think is really out there. Now, I want you to hit that notification bell because there's a part 3 to this episode. Next week, we're going to do a deep dive into Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, and L. Ron Hubbard, and we're going to talk about that ritual that they performed out there that the Collins Elite thinks started this whole thing. I don't want you to miss it because it's going to be a good one. Now, do you have a story, something unexplainable ever happened? A strange encounter that you've never told anyone? Well, I want to hear it. Go ahead and drop it down in the comments below, or you can email us at relativeperspective76@gmail.com. And who knows, if you give your permission, you might just hear it on a future episode. And also, like I asked you at the very beginning, listen to the end just to kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. I want to hear your opinions. I want you to put them down in the comments and let me know what you think. Because honestly, I don't want to just be, telling stories about this stuff. I want to build a community of truth seekers that's not afraid to question what they think is really going on out there or what they're trying to hide from us. So go ahead and drop your opinions down in the comments, and I love to read them. I'll try to read every one of them. So until next time, I want you to stay safe and stay curious. And if you ever feel like something's just a little off, like someone's watching you but no one's there, I want you to trust your gut and get your ass out of there. That's the same thing I would do. All right. God bless you. We love you. Have a good night. Thanks for watching. Whew. Love you. Bye. This was tough.